A warm welcome to this EMCC dialogue session. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world. I'm delighted you're with us. My name is Vincent Traynor and I'm the EMCC lead for the session this afternoon. The session concerns an important new initiative launched in the UK, the National Civic Impact Accelerator, and I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Manners, who's part of the NCIA leadership team. We'd like to share details of the programme with you and engage you in a debate to explore how our thinking and experiences as EMCC global practitioners, professional practitioners, can enhance the thinking and delivery of this important programme. Not only will you be supporting the development of this programme, but you'll also be part of a dialogue that moves us above and beyond maybe our normal dialogue of coaching, mentoring, programme supervision, things of that nature, very much looking to move us to a higher level of dialogue. I know this is very much in thinking with the EMCC Vice President, Denise Whitworth's direction of travel. The agenda for today, which I hope you find interesting and useful, is first of all, Paul and I will do some introductions. Then Paul will talk us through the National Civic Impact Accelerator in some detail. And then we'd like to throw it over to you. We've got a bunch of questions we'd like to share with you. And we'd like to hopefully move into breakout groups to get your thoughts on how you think that this programme can improve. We'd like to inject some thinking, though, some spark into our work, specifically the EMCC global values. How do they impact upon this work? And some other ideas just to spark our conversation. We'll move into breakout groups in order to do that, and then we'll come back and hopefully have a really interesting conversation where those ideas are consolidated. If you've got any questions and suggestions, please put them in the chat box until we go into the breakout groups. And just thanks again for joining us. In terms of who we are, I'll pass over, first of all, to Paul.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock in Bristol, which is where I'm based in England, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the work we're doing and to getting your help, frankly, and to thinking about how the kind of professional world I live in and your professional expertise, how we could perhaps find ways to really share good practice and inspire each other. So I'm really looking forward to the next hour and a half.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm Vincent Traynor. I'm Associate Professor of Change Leadership at Sheffield Hallam University. I've got no responsibility with NCIA, but speaking with Paul and some others, I felt it was a real opportunity to have this dialogue session, hence my role today. So I'll pass over to Paul.
Great. So I just wanted to spend maybe 10, 15 minutes giving you the kind of case study almost that we're going to be then asking you to help us think through how to deliver it. We've just been lucky enough to receive a big grant from one of the funders in the UK to develop this project, and it's to help universities with their civic engagement. And we've got some plans, we've got some ideas, and I'm going to outline those to you and then invite your help. So to kick us off, I just wanted to invite you to look at this picture. What on earth is this? I don't know whether anybody's got any ideas. It would be lovely if you wanted to just pop any thoughts into the chat. It is something to do with how people often think about universities. I'm giving you a big clue there. And so please do use the chat if you've got any ideas. It is an ivory tower, in case you haven't worked that out. And it's this sort of notion of universities sort of sitting in the world, but separate from the world, kind of hard to access, privileged, and kind of with many barriers between us and the world outside. And yes, Esther, a hierarchical complex. I can't think sometimes of a better word to describe what universities are like. But this notion of the ivory tower, I think, is one that many of us who work in the sector and our funders and policymakers all feel we have to do something about. We have to demonstrate that we're trustworthy. We have to build really kind of responsive relationships. We need to ensure that the work we do is relevant, that we are accountable for the huge amounts of public money that we receive. And all of us, I think, care about our social responsibility. So there's a real movement for universities to become better engaged. And that's what I do. That's my job. I run a centre in Bristol that supports universities with their engagement. it isn't just about getting our external relationships better. The next slide, I think, gives you a little bit of an insight into the internal culture of universities. And I don't know how many of you work in the university sector or with people in universities, but this is a piece of research that was done by the Wellcome Trust a couple of years ago to try to get a picture from talking to many, many different researchers at different phases of their career, particularly younger researchers, about their experiences working inside universities. And they ran a series of town halls, and these 12 rather upsetting themes emerged about the kinds of experiences some, and in some cases many, particularly early career researchers experience. Instability and precarity in their contracts, a culture in some places of bullying and harassment, certainly a culture of competition, really high pressure to publish and to progress your academic career. Poor management, deteriorating mental health, long hours culture, inaction on diversity and inclusion, mistrust of complaints, early career challenges. Again, this pressure to publish, lack of recognition and promotion, and gender inequality. So I don't want to depress you, and I don't want to convey the impression that it's awful to work inside universities, but I think basically we are waking up to our humanity, actually, both in terms of our connections out into the world, but also internally in how we care, support, and work collaboratively together. So that is a little bit of context for what I'm about to talk to you about, which is this National Civic Impact Accelerator. So perhaps we could see the next slide. The context for this bid that I'm going to walk you through was this pressure on HEIs, higher education institutions, to respond to the place agenda and to maximize their social value for public good. You probably recognize social value, public good. They're quite common phrases. Place agenda is something very perhaps distinctive in the UK at the moment, but a real focus on exclusion and on inequalities, particularly expressed in how different parts of the UK, different cities and regions have really quite disproportionate amounts of investment, community capacity, etc. So a real sense that we need to address spatial or place-based inequalities. And it would be great, again, in chat if any of these things resonate with you. The next slide then gives you a little bit of a picture of the vision for this accelerator. I love the kind of dynamic language. We're going to accelerate the impact of civic engagement. We're going to, and forgive me for some of this language, it is perhaps a little jargony, and you may find it a little impenetrable, but it's connectivity, connecting ourselves, momentum, and trying to improve the effectiveness of our civic activities for societal, economic, and environmental benefit, and to maximize the contribution universities can make. And yes, it's going to be a challenge, isn't it? Because I've already said there is quite a sort of culture within universities where civic engagement is not the highest priority. So what are we going to do about it? Let's have a look at how we're framing the project. So we find it's really helpful when you're scoping a project of this nature to be really clear about the problem that you're trying to solve. And then from there, you can build a kind of logical chain of interventions with a goal in mind. So our problem is the potential that HEIs, higher education institutions, have to transform and contribute to the place agenda is under-realized, and it's constrained. And there's a number of reasons why we struggle to do this well. One of them is there isn't good evidence about what works. Another is we just don't have joined up structures. It's all a bit dysfunctional. There's a lack of consistent and available measurement. We don't know actually how to take any kind of temperature of the difference that we're making. We don't have ways of measuring what we're achieving. And we have problems with strategy. And I think probably many of you as coaches do a lot of work with people to help them think about strategy. we also don't have necessarily the right skills and expertise. And I think, again, as a community, you're people who really understand how to build capacity and how to support learning. So those are some of the problems. What are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to connect evidence and intelligence. I wonder if that makes sense to you. I mean, I think our assumption is that people do better work if they've got access to really good intelligence and knowledge and insight. So how can we get better knowledge, evidence, and insight to people? We need to connect capacity, operational and strategic capacity. So we need to help people learn how to do this work better, but as importantly, we need to help people learn how to collaborate better, both inside universities, but also with their partners. And we need measurement. We need to be able to evaluate and articulate the difference that we're making. So I'm hoping that you are people who know how to do these things. We've designed 4 work packages to help us solve these problems. And the work packages are built around a framework. And it's a framework for civic impact. And what we've got around the middle of this, in those segments, are 7 areas where we think universities can make a difference: social impact, environmental impact, well-being and health impacts, cultural impacts, economic, in terms of their facilities, their actual buildings and their location, and their leadership. And in those 7 domains, we really think universities can begin to step up. And then around the outside of this framework, we're suggesting a process that people might want to go through, initially just mapping, say in relation to their environmental impact, mapping what their existing impacts are, what their potential partnerships are. So beginning to think about partnering, beginning then to perhaps come to some agreement with colleagues inside and outside the university of what they can do, thinking about how to resource that work, coming up with a clear way of evaluating what they're doing, and crucially, extracting the maximum learning and bringing that learning to bear on the work that they do. So the work streams that will sort of help us operationalize this basically are working to these 4 principles. The first, assess and mobilize evidence of what works for whom and in what context. 2, build capacity for effective civic leadership and engagement. 3, build cross-sector relationships to accelerate the innovation. And 4, operationalize that framework that I've just described to bring metrics that will allow us to monitor, assess, and accelerate civic interventions. It all sounds a little bit kind of mechanical. Acceleration, impact, metrics, monitoring, etc. But I think that kind of language, frankly, helped us convince the funders to dip into their pockets and pay us some money to try it. And finally, the work streams. What are we going to do? We're going to do 4 different work streams. The first work stream is going to be very focused on the evidence capture. So getting knowledge and making that knowledge work as hard as possible. So capturing, curating, and generating, where necessary, evidence against the framework, and then mobilizing and sharing that evidence to support good practice. So that's the first work stream. The second, which is going to work very closely with the first, but is all about learning and innovation, really. It's about bringing people together in communities of practice, learning groups, to really identify the key challenges that they're facing, to find really constructive ways to pool their expertise. We've got pilot funding to let them try some initiatives to see what works or doesn't work. And then coming out of that, we want to create really useful distilled essence of good practice that we can then help others to take up, adopt, and scale. And the third work stream is about scaling. It's very much about how we build this work across all of the universities in England, which is what our funding is encouraging us to do. So how do we actually bring every university into that conversation? And particularly importantly for us is this idea of leadership, distributed leadership across the whole of the HE sector, but equally in our partners outside the university sector, so that there are people there who've got a real vision and a real kind of drive to make this work effective, and they know how to lead it well. So we're going to ask you for your help around how do you support leadership? What have you learned about supporting leadership and getting that distributed across organizations? The final work stream is basically the practical kind of underpinning engine of the project, and we all know how important that is. But within that, there's something again that we want your help with, which is around evaluation. We're deploying a developmental evaluation approach, which means that from the outset, we're really clear about what we hope and expect and plan to happen. But we're going to be continually and formatively assessing the extent to which we're achieving the goals and the outcomes that we thought that we would be able to if we did it the way we think we should. And we may be right, and it may all work beautifully, but I suspect there'll be an awful lot of really useful formative developmental evaluation that really helps us tweak and adjust what we're doing. So that is what we're about. I hope that you kind of get it and it makes sense to you. I'd be intrigued to know what you make of it all, but this is a project and it's about to start. What we wanted to do was to say there are 4 key challenges really linked to those 4 work streams that we're hopeful that people will be able to help us with. So maybe Vincent, we could go to the next slide, please. And I might hand back to you, Vincent, to just frame the challenge.
Thanks, Paul. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is wonderful. And I wonder, before we dive into the 4 questions, I wonder if anybody on the call has any questions for Paul to understand more what this thing is about. Later on, we'll try to help him and his colleagues move it forward. But any questions to clarify more what this program is about? It's new. It's across all of the universities in England. It's trying to do things in a new way, break new ground, but it's up against some maybe cultural and some other challenges. Anybody would like to come forward? Just unmute yourself. Come forward if you have any questions you'd like to ask. Mary?
It's Mary. It all sounds grand, and I think you need all of this stuff because you've got nice structure and it looks like you'll really be able to drive forwards. The piece that I missed was the vision. What's going to be different at the end of this? What is it that you're hoping universities are suddenly going to contribute?
I think suddenly isn't probably a realistic word to use to describe it. Although we talk about acceleration, this doesn't happen overnight. But Mary, it's a really good question. And I think actually there is already really good work that's happening that gives us confidence. And I think it works at many levels. So there have been some examples, say in the city of Nottingham, where previously we've got 2 universities. We've got the University of Nottingham, we've got Nottingham Trent University. Previously, those 2 universities worked pretty independently of each other in the city, had their own kind of relationships, and made a reasonably impressive contribution to the city of Nottingham. But there was a lot of untapped potential. About a year and a half ago, after spending a year, I think, really planning this out carefully with partners in the city, they've come up with what they're calling a civic agreement for Nottingham. And that civic agreement identifies 4 or 5 critical areas where the city and its communities and its political leaders and many of its kind of public sector organizations and many of its businesses have all said, we care about this, we really want to do better. So that could be in relation to the skills, the support for skills across, primary, secondary, FE, HE, further education, higher education. How do we work together on the skills and particularly the opportunities for less advantaged young people in the city? They've got some shared agendas around health that they're going to work on. the two universities for the first time are going to really pool their expertise in relation to those challenges, and they've set themselves some quite challenging targets about the difference that they hope this is going to make. So they've started, and it's great, and it's quite high level, and it's all a bit up here, but also equally, I think what we're seeing is a range of sort of more grassroots projects that are beginning to really flourish, say where a particular department in a university has developed some long-term relationships with key kind of community and voluntary organizations with a shared agenda around a particular kind of issue, say to do with well-being or to do with actually the physical space in the city and the extent to which that physical space is inclusive, say, of older people. And they've developed partnerships around, a lovely example in Manchester is kind of age-friendly Manchester, really working on this fact that for many older people, cities are increasingly unpleasant and difficult places to navigate. And a whole host of recommendations have come out through the research and the kind of consultation that have then been taken up by the city council, and a whole host of things are being done about the infrastructure in the city to make them better places for older people to live. So it's that mix of kind of some high level vision, but also some really practical things that on the ground make a big difference for people. And I think finally, this stuff people in universities care about. They are motivated to make a difference and motivated to sort of get better connected. So this actually really, I think, could make a difference to the morale in universities. And when I spoke to you earlier about some of those issues around research culture and how toxic it can be, I think people would feel a lot more motivated and a lot more like they belonged in universities that had a more outward facing and a more kind of civic mindset. So I think it'll have a big difference to people's kind of sense of belonging.
Thanks, Mary. That's fabulous. There's two questions that are maybe linked from Shirley and Marilyn. Thanks both for adding those to the list, that maybe come at it from a different perspective in terms of the impact upon students. What would your thoughts be on that, Paul, in terms of Shirley's question, in terms of where do students stand on this? What are their needs? But also the inclusivity question in terms of university admissions. Do you see the flow going the other way, you might say, in terms of impact upon students?
Yeah, I think in terms of the input from students, yes, there's definitely been some really quite significant work already. And one particular area where that's got an extremely significant amount of momentum is in relation to the environmental impact of universities. Many students are really passionately committed to addressing issues in sustainability and the environmental footprint of their university, and also in addressing those bigger kind of global issues around climate, heating and so on. And so there's a tremendous amount of involvement from students, whether that's through curriculum linked activity where they're addressing a particular challenge in that local area, maybe supporting a local charity that's working around areas of environmental kind of communication and helping them with that, or whether it's actually working on specific environmental projects where they can make a difference. But yes, the student involvement is key. And I think in terms of the long-term impact of this work, the more students, when they're within universities, develop their kind of civic professionalism, almost you could talk about it, that mindset of being really connected and responsible in their professional lives. The more that universities inculcate that, I think the more the long-term impact as those young people move out into the world and develop their professional capabilities, the better. So that's true. And I think just going to Marilyn's question, how will this impact inclusivity in university admissions? That is a huge underpinning kind of challenge, I think, that all the universities who are involved in this care deeply about, and particularly perhaps research intensive universities who traditionally are seen as being not particularly inclusive in their admissions. So I think a lot of them are building in ways of working that will cultivate more inclusion in relation to the students, perhaps in their city, who feel actually confident to apply by building those stronger partnerships with local education providers, say. So it's a big deal and it really matters.
And I guess it's a double loop that as these projects, which might be strategic or might be operational on the ground, are enacted and delivered, and they may be tiny, but at least they're out there and they're encouraged, and they will grow into more things, that the people who engage with those will realize that will feel less worried about engaging in a university conversation, and more encouraged themselves and their children to sign up, or to at least inquire about a university career or course. Jeremy, that's very thought-provoking what you've put in. Where's your head right now? We'll come to sort of ideas in a moment, but where's your head? You've got a background in HEI.
So to respond to that, where's my head question? It's a bit all over the place, to be honest. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. So just a tiny bit of background. So I was an academic in a university in the south for some time, and with an educational brief, not a research brief. And I experienced a lot in I had leadership roles in things like admissions into the university and outreach activities to persuade young adults to come to university. So I guess one of the things that's floating around is how do you draw together all of the often fantastic work that's been done at, if you like, subject level into this UK-wide project on civil engagement. There's just so much going on within, I would say, that's based around subjects, not as well as institutions, and how do you draw those things together? I guess, if I may, I understood what you said about the language appealing to the higher education, the funders who are going to be providing you money, but I think it is often a danger, a risk, that language doesn't get corrected when it comes to communicating with those civic stakeholders who. So as I was listening to you, I understood it, I think, but I was left quite cold. I wasn't warmed by it at all. So there's a danger if this language is perpetuated into the stakeholder area. You'll get the money, but not the engagement. That's a little bit directly put, but that's what I was feeling.
No, I couldn't agree more, to be honest. I don't like the language that this is expressed in particularly. In fact, I find it rather I probably have a similar reaction to you, to be frank, and I think we definitely need to attend to that.
Okay. And I don't want to hog the microphone too much, but I suppose it's another area of thinking about learning from other activities are. I spent some time in the National Institute for Health Research, actually as part of an academic institution, and they have, for example, a very active engagement with they're called public patients and all of the people who are engaged in healthcare. They work very carefully to build a community of practice that involves those stakeholders, and that's a body of work that sounds like it could play into this sort of territory. So there's many other examples of that, I'm sure, that you may or may not have already engaged with. So I'm just thinking of what's already out there that you can draw on.
Oh, and I feel like I like to think I'm young, but I'm not. I've been around a long time. And I started back, in education back in the 1980s. But so many of these ideas I recognize have been recycled a couple of times in the last sort of 35 years. And there's so many deep traditions of, say, community engagement, lifelong learning, work in health that is just exemplary. And I think one of the jobs around that evidence capture in particular is to convince people to stop thinking that this is new, and to really understand that there's a lot of experience and expertise in how to do this work well. And also, I think that's as much, probably far more outside the university than within. And so opening people's minds to that, I think, is going to be a challenge.
Okay.
May I offer one more thing, Vincent? Just a thought.
Free, Jeremy.
This is the coach in me speaking a little bit. They're big on thinking of the significance of language. And I know you started the talk with that image of an ivory tower, and I really got that. But that's what triggered all sorts of thoughts in my mind. But I wonder whether it's actually there's a risk of putting the thought into people's minds that universities are ivory towers, and they're not. they're rather better than that now. So yeah, that's just the thought on that subject. So thank you for giving me some airtime.
That's very thought-provoking. Thanks, Jeremy. Let's move forward a little bit. There are 10 of us on the call, and so maybe we're I guess Paul and I are trying to think how best to work with you folks in a second or so. But just until we do that, what I thought might be helpful in terms of us as a group of EMCC professional practitioners reflecting in on this NCIA program, I thought it might be helpful if we just reflected for a second or two upon the EMCC global principles that are part of our DNA. I'm not sure how much this is being communicated, but I found it quite useful to look at this in terms of, I'll just read them out, in terms of EMCC having a pioneering spirit. So I'm wondering, what does that mean in terms of the NCIA program? Similarly, excellence and standards. What's the relevance of that, if any, to the program? Strong research base. Well, maybe Paul's already alluded to that, but you might have other ideas as to how research could come in here. Not necessarily EMCC research, but just the concepts of research. Obviously, inclusiveness, we've talked about that a little bit, and cultural diversity. And then the final two around social responsibility and being close to you. And what I think the words there refer to is where the EMCC is acting as a bottom-up organization, which is about, to quote the slide, it's about unity, not uniformity. That difference in opinion is there and it's possible. So that might spark some ideas in terms of our subsequent conversation. The other thing that might be of help is I just went through each of those work streams before we met today, and I just thought, well, from a practitioner perspective, what practical questions might be of help here? And I'm offering these just to spark our thoughts, get our juices flowing, so to speak. So, for example, with the first work stream, it's all about evidence capture. So I was thinking about, from the work that we do with the EMCC and elsewhere, what have we learned about our programs? How has knowledge transferred there from the programs we've been part of or delivered or commissioned? There can be questions about tacit knowledge and how to make that explicit. I think a lot of work that we do is in the tacit space, and how effective are conferences, papers, local groups to the development of knowledge and people moving forward with that. In terms of the second work stream, maybe some other ideas that might be helpful. I was thinking about this NCIA, if it's fundamentally an issue of inter-organizational collaboration between universities and other organizations, where there's different cultures, different primary tasks, different attitudes to risk and learning and profit agendas, all very different in very different places. Maybe there can be some work from our team coaching standards that can inform, maybe questions around how do we support people in those different organizations when extraneous forces come to bear. Budget pressures or resource pressures that mean that collaboration is a bit harder. How do we support people through that? And also maybe there can be questions around the supervisory frames we have. Can that help in terms of learning? Two other quick thoughts on the other two work streams. In terms of the third work stream around leadership and distributed leadership, how can we create shared agendas amongst people from disparate groups, especially when pressure's on? How can we support people to work on the edge of their organization's core mission or primary focus? Can we help people find common ground and unlock potential? How might that happen in a collective sense? And also, what does containment mean for distributed leadership in terms of staying safe and taking risks that are doable, but not too scary? And then finally, in terms of program management, so some people here might be involved in the international standards for mentoring and coaching programs. There might be lessons to learn from that. And then many of us will have been involved in either running or commissioning programs. So we may have evidence or examples from where we're doing hard post hoc evaluations, but also the more in-flight evaluations that Paul talked of earlier. So that might be useful in those 4 slides, and this one in particular may be of use to just help us think about some ideas that might come to mind that might be useful for the NCI program. They may not, but I hope they are. So what we were wondering is there, and it's hard to say because of some people are understandably not sharing their video, and I get that, but just give us a sense. Maybe you could put your hand up if you're on for engaging in a small group activity to help us think through this. Because where I'm trying to get to is there viability for us to run 2 small groups? Maybe just put your hand up and let us know. So I see Marlon, would you be on for that as well? Good. And I'm not sure about Anastasia or Carlos. So maybe if we just assume, and folks come in if I'm sorry, accidentally misrepresenting you. So it sounds as if there's Esther, Marlon, Jeremy, Mary, Lucy, and Tatiana who could be involved in some peer group work. I wonder if we could run 2 peer groups. Paul, what would your thinking be?
Yeah, I would be really nice.
So 2 breakout groups.
Yeah, that would be really nice, and and to work out between us, which of the 4 are the most interesting to you, really, because all of them would be interesting to me. What you think, but if we had to sort of choose of those 4, are there a couple that people feel are particularly relevant where you'd particularly like to help us with? So, the first one is about how you could help us think about how to get knowledge to work harder. The second one, how to create learning communities. I have to say I've got a particular passion for number 2 because I'm responsible for that work stream. So I'm just
no influencing there, Paul.
The third one is around leadership and what you've learned about how to support leadership in the 4th around evaluation. That's really helpful. I mean, Esther, you've just done a brilliant thing, which is to use the chat to just say that for you 2 and 3 felt like particularly useful ones, and then we could perhaps just prioritize if everyone else is happy to do that.
Or maybe we could just say, put your hand up if you're most interested in number 1.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got 1 taker for that. Put your hand up if you're most interested in number 2. We've got 3 for that. I feel like this is some sort of online television voting thing. For number 3, put your hand up if you're interested in that. There's 2 ? And for number 4, put your hand up if you're interested in that. So nobody for 4. So by the power vested in me, I think that there's most interest in 2 and 3, and I hope I'm representing the group's interests as I say that. So how does it sound if we set up those 2 breakout? Well, we'll set up all of the breakout rooms, but only go into either 2 or 3. And we have a Padlet. Let me share with you. We have Paul will nip into both groups. So we have a Padlet online capture tool that we will pop in the chat box for each of those 2 groups. And so what we encourage you very much to do is have a discussion and a dialogue in your small group. Paul and maybe I will join you for at least some of that session. And if you've got ideas that relate to that you think could usefully be shared with Paul and the team, pop them into the Padlet box, and it's really easy to do. You just click on one of those little plus marks and add your ideas. But I guess, Paul, you can explain that to people when they're in the groups. Hopefully that makes sense. Give us a rough thumbs up. Give us a thumbs up if you get what we're trying to do here. Brilliant. So maybe we could ask our IT support to set up those groups. As I say, go into either 2 or 3. Don't go into 1 or 4 because you'll be alone. And then Paul or I will join you, and we can set the links up as well. Is that okay with you, Paul, as a process?
It sounds great to me. I'll go into 2, if that's okay. And Vincent, if you wouldn't mind doing 3, I also just messaged Kirsty to see if she'd join 3, just to pop the link into the chat. But yeah, I'll be in 2, so I look forward to meeting you there in a minute.
Okay.
And we've got how long, Vincent?
We've got a good. Let's give it 25 minutes as before.
Great.
We're really interested in the dialogue, folks. It's close to our hearts. We're all back. I don't know about you folks. We had a fantastic conversation in our small group. Would at the altar of numerals, can we invite the second group to maybe give a quick summary of where you folks got to?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was utterly wonderful from my point of view. But I think, Esther, you were just going to share a few thoughts about, basically, we were looking at ways in which the kind of coaching mindset and expertise can help universities. And a number of the group have already tried and have come up with some ways of working. So I wondered, Esther, if you could start by just telling us how you discovered ways of working.
Okay, just very briefly. One way is coaching professors directly and groups of professors in teaching, learning, curricular development, and skills alignment between what students need in the outside world and what they teach students in academia. In addition, coaching for students when working together with Careers Office to prepare students for any jobs that they may consider, like career counseling, but more from the coaching perspective. Third of it is integrating the concept of coaching and coaching strategies into the classroom, where you basically use the concept of coaching and asking questions and focus on the students as learners, as opposed to what professors always do, is talk at students.
So I think, I mean, my humbling takeaway from the conversation with colleagues was that although universities might think of themselves as engines of learning and driven by curiosity, the feedback, Vincent, this is so depressing to hear, but the feedback was that actually people's experience of the cultures within universities is that they actually inhibit learning, they inhibit self-awareness, and they actually, seriously impede all of that kind of openness that I was talking about in that opening, about how can we be more engaged, more connected. And I think what our colleagues fed back was, if universities used a kind of coaching mindset to work, both to develop people as individuals, but also to encourage teams to work together better, it would have quite a transformative effect on our own ability to scaffold learning inside and outside the university. So it was a very cold shower, actually. Yeah.
And one way, if I may come in, one practical way through there is that some of the universities in the UK, I mean, we're one in Sheffield Hallam, but there are many others who are at the forefront of delivering coaching and mentoring programs and supervision programs and team coaching, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody in those universities has a coaching mindset, but at least those departments, or at least those course leaders and those teams would have a coaching mindset. So maybe there's I don't want to use the phrase quick win, but maybe that's where maybe immediate leverage could be gained with those departments in those universities. And that's very easy to work out. It's already on the website. It's already on the EMCC website.
Yeah. And in a real sense of the gift that you can give us as a community of professionals is both, those kind of facilitation skills, your kind of personal kind of powers of magically helping people become more curious, more reflective, more connected, but also, the formats and the structures that you've developed as almost techniques that can help for that kind of work. So, you bring your personal expertise, but you also have ways of working that could be lifted, and all of, Shirley, Lucy, Jeremy, all shared fantastic kind of practical suggestions about what they're doing. Shirley talked about the work she's trying to do in the NHS to bring that kind of coaching mindset as well. Lucy talked about her experience in Canada working in a kind of advisory capacity, but as a parent. Jeremy talked about his work kind of coaching and trying to have a career in a university, and I think perhaps leaving with his tail between his legs, feeling slightly kind of like it wasn't the most professionally rewarding experience of his life. But I don't know whether any of you wanted to chip in at all, whether I fairly characterized you.
I would just like to respond to that. It was a fine experience. I had no problem with that, and I've got huge respect for the university sector. And in my private practice, which I've been in for a long time, I'm delighted to work in it. So no tail between the legs. I left with head held high, knowing that my time was done. But I was frustrated by it. I'm quite happy to put this on a recording. I was frustrated by the fact that these learning institutions with huge skills and resources available at individual and collective level didn't punch above their weight. So that was the frustration. But the thing that occurs to me in terms of the discussion here is we, the people who want to change things, have to demonstrate, the what's in it for you, what's in it for me, what's in it for us equation.
Yeah.
And if you can't demonstrate the value of taking a coaching approach over whatever approach is taken at the moment, more directive, more hierarchical leadership, then it won't happen. So it's down to the coaching community to be able to make the case that it's worthwhile. And when there is evidential stories to be told, where there's evidence to demonstrate the unquestionable value of the coaching approach, that those stories are shared very clearly, loudly, and effectively.
I guess the other thing to build on that is that those institutions where that is becoming the norm have maybe more to share than just their skills. I think that they've had to find a foothold in an environment that might be hostile is too strong a word, but it might be antagonistic or hostile, or at least neutral. And so I think they will have lessons to share in terms of how they found that foothold and how they're supporting each other through that foothold, both within the departments on courses, but also I think there's a loose connection between different departments, different universities who do this. We have like an umbilical cord link between each other, and the EMCC supports that. So I think they too would have lessons to learn. They have lessons to share. If they've found a way of finding a foothold, that might also feed into the NCIA's people finding footholds.
So could you imagine at any university just employing a team of sort of 6 to 8 coaches who are like bees buzzing around, pollinating wonderful new ways of working? Is that a model that has been tried, so that they become almost like institutionalized as change agents within the university?
I've got it's not that experience, but I think the university I was at had a very internal coaching system that was in place, where staff were supported as coaches by a very experienced coach supervisor. And that was a very valuable resource, but it was one of those things that's typical of an academic situation. It was over and above everybody's day job.
Yeah.
So that was the challenge in just making it available at scale.
I'd like to share that at one university, that was a few of us tried to do it as a grassroots effort from the faculty, and doing it among faculty and doing a little bit of going up towards the deans. And we made a lot of noise, and that worked. At another university, I was in a position of a faculty developer where we actually worked with faculty. That was our job. And what was most effective, rather in addition to doing it one-on-one with individual faculty, is actually working together with deans and department chairs. And they are in charge of their department. And if the initiative comes from them about their faculty, then it works as well. But if the department chair is not so interested in it, it's the end of the road. And universities tend to be very siloed, and the mindsets of the deans and department chairs are really important. Yeah. What works even better is going yet another step up and doing it throughout the university with an initiative from above. And that is what I'm trying to do right now. and I can share more with you. I just wanted to say that the strategy of working together, doing it as grassroots with faculty, is wonderful, but it does really not go anywhere. If you want to do this systemically, you have to think big.
Would it help, Paul, if we shared some ideas from the third?
Oh, that would be wonderful. I can just see that Mish has got a hand up in the top left-hand corner of my screen.
Yes, I just want to say that really quickly, that I find that the approach to getting into universities or helping universities, in my experience, does not differ much from getting into a big company. You need to get the bigger, the heads involved. And I am in Buenos Aires, but I have worked in Guatemala. And if the people who have the money and the decision, and I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this time is of the essence, of course, but people, the decision makers or the people who manage the money are not on board and have not tested working with a coach, it's going to be very hard for us to go by departments. That's another way to go. But as far as being a bigger program, I would say, I would approach it as getting into a Fortune 500 company, depending on the amount of students that are enrolled in that university. And thank you for your time. Great seeing you,
Thanks,
Luz.
Mish.
Sobering words from Mish. Thank you. Shall we move on to the other group now? If I share our Padlet screen, then maybe, okay, what if I start the ball rolling? I think themes that emerged from our conversation was being really clear on who the stakeholders are, particularly youth and others, and translating the NCIA language to them so it's meaningful. And I think where we got to was saying that translation process could be one that is a shared endeavor rather than done in the center or somewhere else. I think that there was very much focus on inclusion in terms of maybe as Mish has just been alluding to, focusing on people from families who haven't attended university before, but similarly framing it in ways that are meaningful and practical to them, and maybe start small and getting bigger. That may be what comes off that. There was certainly a conversation about bringing in ideas from the corporate world and ensuring that universities sign up for this, and that there is a named person in the universities and other organizations who leads on this as pretty much a full-time thing, or where it's exclusive. It's something that is absolutely on their work to do. Questions around maybe which universities would sign up for this. Would they all be up for it? Maybe not all would be, and maybe there's a prioritization there. And then we discussed this was around distributed leadership and scaling up leadership, and we talked about we're just imagining a situation where you might have 20 universities, you might have 40 charities, and maybe 30 other organizations, and there may be pockets of work that are happening, some big, some small, but hopefully all coming together in some sense. And I think there was a theme there as to the degree to which control was needed over those projects, or mini projects, or call them what you will, those distributed projects, and how much control and boundary is needed around them. How much flexibility do they have, and what's the relationship between those projects and the centre, whatever the centre means? It might be a funding or resource giver or whatever, and to make sure that that relationship is meaningful and vital, rather than having to be done by diktat, or where the projects feed back meaningless data in some sense. I'll stop there. Hopefully I've caught the theme of it, but I'm sure I haven't caught everything. Would anybody else like to come in with anything else that we covered that I haven't tried to summarize? We too talked about the role of coaching and who would who would do that. And I think the theme there that I picked up was if people were in a university, and at least my view is that people in universities have quite straitjacketed roles. They may talk a certain language, but when it comes to what do they do on a 9-to-5 basis, it is quite constrained. And so maybe coaching to help people maybe involved in this program to go outside of that, to take the risks of experimenting out with their 9-to-5 job, so to speak.
Yeah, and just making me laugh, Vincent, on the topic of language, which has come through really strongly to me today. And it's so interesting, isn't it, when you step out of your kind of professional world and you suddenly realize the words coming out of your mouth are potentially gobbledygook. Actually, so it's always good to speak to a slightly different professional or public audience about the work and try to keep it simple. But I think people in universities are struggling to come up with names for these people who act at the kind of interface and try to kind of really get people to listen and learn and understand each other better. But one of the phrases that they've developed is a boundary spanner. I don't know whether any of you would like to call yourself a boundary spanner, but that seems to me to be one of the more one of the less elegant descriptions. We've got the idea of knowledge brokers. We've got the idea of engagement professionals. We've got the idea of knowledge mobilizers. We've kind of come up with a string of terms to describe these roles, but boundary spanner is the one that I think I find particularly kind of mechanical. But it's so important. I get why they've identified it, because it is, there are boundaries and they do need to be bridged. And we need people with the skills to help us do that.
I'm conscious we're moving towards the end of the session, and I'm going to invite Paul just to reflect on what he's heard in a moment. But is there anything from anybody else? We've still got a few minutes. Anything else you think, we haven't talked about this, or we haven't talked about that, or we've alluded to this, but not in the way that, any other thoughts that are really bubbling up for you that you think are really important for us to hear? Or initiatives that have worked elsewhere, or definitely don't fall into this trap, Paul. That there might be something in that that category as well. Any final thoughts?
Let me just have a go. I was just thinking about this, because in our Padlet, we also have our fourth question was, please add any examples we can be inspired by. And I come from a corporate background, Paul, so I equally have language problems because I speak my own private language too. But what we've always said is, and you can see it everywhere, what did COVID bring us that was positive? And there was this enormous emergency, and we all moved, and the speed at which we moved to help people work from home or get vaccines rolled out, whatever business we were in, universities being able to lecture, when you've got a distributed set of students. The speed we moved at then, in comparison to what we used to do when we used to sit around and talk about it for a long while, we always had a laugh, or I used to have a laugh, not everybody did, but you've got this plan, do, check, act type thing of going round, and this is what corporates, good responsibility to do. And I always called it plan, dither, complain, abandon, because you can talk yourself out of things. and actually, could we get some burning platform to actually get this to move rapidly? Is there a burning platform, or could this talk itself out?
Yeah, that's really useful. I'm going to draw a line under that, just because I want to honour the 3:30 UK time finish. Sorry, if there's any other points you want to make, please pop them in the chat. But I do want to throw the floor back to Paul, just to get your reactions, ideas, top level summary.
Yeah, I just think one really big idea has just hit me firmly today, which is, you know, we come up with these highfalutin ideas and these big projects, and we can fail to see the wood for the trees. I think what you've reminded me is that at the heart, universities need to be human-centered, people-centered in their practice and in their mindset and in their values. And if we don't get that right, then these big kind of external facing schemes are doomed to just scratch the surface. So putting the heart and the humanity at the heart of our work with the kinds of skills that people like yourself have seems to me to be the big takeaway for me. And I think the burning platform is probably that slide I showed you about the morale and the experience of talented, brilliant young people, particularly not always young, but who are really demoralized and potentially worse through their experience of working in the university sector. And the morale across the sector is very low. So I think that is the burning platform, that actually our experience of working together in a community isn't how it should be. And it's actually seriously toxic. And that is a burning platform, if ever there was one. So thank you. It's really helpful.
Thanks, Paul. And I would just like to say massive thank you to you all for your contributions this afternoon. Thanks to Paul for volunteering to be part of this gig. I'm chuffed to bits that we were able to collaborate on it, and I hope you got something out of it. I know I did, and I know Denise Whitworth isn't with us, but I'm sure that she too would feel that there's something here in terms of where strategically the EMCC moves forward to, where we're working with the likes of Paul and other people like Paul, and moving ourselves to, you may say, a higher level of debate, which of course needs a higher level of language. We've covered all of that. So we'll bring it to a close here now. I think the recording will stop any minute, but just a massive thank you from me on behalf of the EMCC. Well done, everybody.
Thank you.
We're now moving on to the 30 minutes of networking. We can hang around. So if you want to hang around and just have a chat with anybody who's still here, feel free. But otherwise, we'll draw this session to a close with my thanks. And it's just been a pleasure working with you all today. We weren't sure who was going to turn up, but I think we've had a really great conversation. So thank you very much, one and all.